You're crouched at the edge of a ridge 40,000 years ago, and your hands are shaking, not from cold, from hunger. In front of you is a strip of meat, torn from an animal your group killed 3 days ago. It's already turning. You know if you eat it raw. Your body will spend the next 6 hours trying to break it down, and you might still starve before it gives you enough energy to move tomorrow. But someone in your group just did something different. They held the meat over the flame. Everyone around you goes quiet. Some of them look afraid. Fire is for warmth. Fire is for keeping predators away. Nobody eats what fire has touched. But the smell coming off that meat is doing something to your body that you don't understand yet. Your mouth is flooding with saliva. Your stomach isn't just hungry anymore. It's aching. And somewhere in your skull, a part of your brain that has never once directed you toward danger is now screaming at you to move toward the flame. You don't know it in this moment, but what happens next will not just feed you. It will rewrite the genetic code of every human being who comes after you. It will shrink your gut. It will grow your brain. It will change the shape of your face, the size of your teeth, and the chemistry of your saliva. It will decide, hundreds of thousands of years later, whether your descendants crave bread, whether they can digest milk, whether they binge eat at 2 a.m. standing in front of an open fridge. One bite, one habit. And human DNA was never the same again. For most of our history, our ancestors were not the animal that dominates the planet. They were small, slow, and physically unimpressive compared to almost everything around them. What they had going for them was not strength. It was not speed. It was the ability to adapt faster than their bodies could naturally evolve. And that ability came from a habit almost nobody talks about when they explain human history. Not tool use, not language. Cooking. Before fire, early hominins spent nearly half of every single day just chewing. Raw meat is tough. Raw plants are worse. Full of cellulose, full of toxins, loaded with fibers a human gut cannot break down efficiently. Chimpanzees today, our closest living relatives, spend around 6 hours a day chewing raw food just to extract enough calories to survive. 6 hours. Every day. Not hunting. Not resting. Not caring for offspring. Just chewing. Now imagine trying to build a civilization, a language, a culture, when half your waking life is spent grinding food between your teeth. That was the reality for millions of years. Early humans had guts 3 times larger than what we carry today, because raw food needs more space and more time to digest. Their brains were tiny by comparison, because brain tissue is metabolically expensive. It burns through energy at a rate almost nothing else in the body can match. You cannot have a huge gut and a huge brain at the same time. The body doesn't have the energy budget for both. So something had to give. And here's what scientists actually found when they went looking for the answer. Around 1.9 to 1.8 million years ago, the fossil record shows something strange. A new species appears, Homo erectus, and almost overnight, in evolutionary terms, the gut shrinks and the brain grows. Teeth get smaller. Jaws get weaker. Digestive tracts shorten dramatically. This is not a slow, gradual shift. It's abrupt. It's the kind of jump you'd expect if something outside the body suddenly started doing part of the digestion for it. That something was fire. Cooking does something almost magical to food, biologically speaking. Heat breaks down tough fibers before your teeth ever touch them. It denatures proteins, unwinding them so your stomach acid can access them instantly instead of grinding for hours. It gelatinizes starches, turning them from nearly indigestible granules into soft, calorie-dense fuel. In lab studies, cooked meat delivers up to 50% more usable calories than the same piece eaten raw. Cooked starch can deliver even more. Your ancestors weren't just eating differently. They were suddenly getting far more energy for far less physical cost from the exact same amount of food. And that extra energy had to go somewhere. It went into the brain. This is what researchers call the expensive tissue hypothesis, and it's one of the most quietly disturbing ideas in human evolution. The brain that lets you read this sentence. The brain that gave humans language, art, mathematics, and the ability to leave the planet. That brain only exists because an ancestor of yours started putting meat near fire and eating what came out the other side. Not because they got smarter first and then figured out cooking. The causality runs the other way. Cooking came first. The bigger brain was the result. But here's what should really unsettle you. This wasn't a choice made with any understanding of biology. Nobody sat around a fire 2 million years ago and said, if we do this consistently, our descendants will have brains 3 times larger and guts half the size. It was an accident, a habit, repeated by accident, by individuals who simply liked the taste and the ease of it, that quietly rewrote the blueprint of an entire species. That should sound familiar, because it's exactly how modern habits work on you, right now without your permission. Have you ever wondered why you crave things you know are bad for you? Why sugar and fat hit your brain's reward system so precisely, so reliably, that entire industries are built around exploiting it? That craving isn't a modern malfunction. It's an ancient survival mechanism, tuned across 1 million years to chase the most calorie-dense, easiest to digest food available. Because for most of human history, that food was rare and craving it kept you alive. The habit that built your brain also built your weakness. Same wiring, different environment. Now here's where the story takes a turn almost nobody expects. Cooking didn't just change energy. It changed the genome itself, in ways scientists can now trace letter by letter in your DNA. Look at the gene AME1, which controls the enzyme amylase, the thing in your saliva that starts breaking down starch the moment food touches your tongue. Modern humans carry far more copies of this gene than our closest primate relatives. Some people carry more than a dozen copies. Chimpanzees typically carry 2. Every extra copy means more amylase, means faster starch digestion, means more energy extracted from cooked roots, grains, and tubers, the exact foods that became reliable once fire made them soft and safe to eat consistently. This is not a small detail. Gene duplication like this is one of the clearest fingerprints evolution leaves behind when behavior becomes so consistent, so essential to survival, that natural selection locks it into the code. Populations with more AME1 copies were populations that ate more cooked starch generation after generation, until their bodies adapted to expect it. But scientists went further and found something even more specific. The gut shrinkage that came with cooking didn't just make room for a bigger brain. It also meant humans lost the ability to survive purely on raw food the way other primates can. Studies on modern humans who attempt strict long-term raw food diets show something striking. Many struggle to maintain healthy body weight. Women in particular can experience disrupted menstrual cycles, and overall energy intake tends to run persistently low, even when they're eating large volumes of food. Our bodies, quite literally, are no longer built for a world without fire. The habit didn't just help us. It made us dependent. There was no going back. Think about what that means. An adaptation that made us the most powerful species on Earth also made us fragile in a way no other animal is fragile. Take away cooking, and modern humans are, in some very real biological sense, less equipped to survive on raw food than chimpanzee is. We traded resilience for horsepower, and we didn't get a vote. What you're about to hear next was buried for decades, because it complicates the tidy version of the story that most documentaries like to tell. For a long time, the cooking made us human idea was treated almost like folklore. Compelling, but hard to prove because fire doesn't fossilize. You can't dig up a campfire from 2 million years ago and carbon date a burnt steak. Critics pointed out that clear, undisputed evidence of controlled fire use doesn't reliably appear in the archaeological record until much later, closer to 400,000 to 300,000 years ago at many sites. That's over 1 million years after the gut shrinking, brain-growing changes show up in the fossils. If fire came that much later, how could cooking have caused the earlier transformation? This gap sat unresolved for years. But then researchers started looking in a different place, not at ash and charcoal, but at stone, at a site called Wonderwork Cave in South Africa. Deep inside the cave, where wind and rain couldn't have started a natural blaze, archaeologists found burned bone fragments and ash residue dated to roughly 1 million years ago. Too deep inside the cave for lightning. Too consistent to be accidental. It pushed the timeline for controlled fire use back dramatically, and suddenly the biology and the archaeology started lining up again. Even more striking, some researchers now argue the earliest fire use may have been even more sporadic and opportunistic than a modern campfire. Not a nightly ritual, but occasional, exploiting natural fires, using them just often enough, just consistently enough over hundreds of thousands of years to start tilting natural selection in a new direction. You don't need fire every single night to reshape a species over 1 million years. You just need it often enough, generation after generation, for the individuals who could exploit it to slightly outcompete the ones who couldn't. That's a very different picture than the one most people imagine. It's not one dramatic breakthrough moment where a genius ancestor discovered fire and everything changed overnight. It's something slower, messier, and in some ways more disturbing, countless small, quiet advantages repeated by countless individuals over hundreds of thousands of years, none of them aware they were editing the species. And here's the part that connects directly to you, sitting wherever you're sitting right now, watching this. Every time you feel a craving you can't fully explain, the pull toward a warm meal on a cold night, the comfort of something rich and fatty when you're stressed, the strange, almost primal satisfaction of food cooked over an open flame at a barbecue, you are feeling the echo of that million-year-old habit. Psychologists have long noted that humans form deeper emotional associations with cooked, warm food than with cold or raw food. It's tied to comfort, to safety, to belonging. That's not random. Fire meant a group meant protection. Food shared around a flame meant you weren't alone in a world that could kill you in 100 different ways. Your brain still remembers that, even if you've never once needed fire to survive a single night of your life. Now for the part of this story that gets left out of almost every version you've heard before, because it's the part that doesn't feel good. The same habit that built your brain, shrank your gut, and gave you the calories to become the dominant species on the planet, also rewired something darker. Once cooking became reliable, groups that controlled fire had an advantage over groups that didn't, not just nutritionally, but socially and politically. Fire meant light after dark, which meant more waking hours for talking, planning, teaching, and yes, plotting. Some anthropologists argue the campfire is where complex human social structure, hierarchy, storytelling, coordinated deception, even early forms of manipulation, really began to accelerate. Longer evenings awake together didn't just build bonds. They built the earliest arenas for social competition, gossip, and exclusion. And there's a harder truth sitting underneath all of this. The extra calories cooking provided didn't just grow brains. Some researchers argue they also freed up the energy and time that made increasingly organized violence between groups possible. A species spending 6 hours a day chewing raw fiber has little energy left over for sustained conflict. A species that cooks and gets those same calories in a fraction of the time suddenly has spare capacity for warfare, for raiding, for the kind of coordinated group violence that shows up increasingly in the archaeological record as human societies grew more complex. The habit that fed us may have also armed us. That's the uncomfortable center of this whole story. We tend to tell it as a triumph. Humans tamed fire, and fire made us brilliant. But taming fire also meant taming a new kind of vulnerability, dependency, and capacity for harm that no other primate on Earth carries at the same scale. We didn't just gain something the day we started cooking. We lost the ability to survive without it. And we gained the surplus energy to turn on each other in ways our raw food ancestors simply couldn't afford to. Think about that the next time you order takeout without a second thought, or throw half a meal away because you weren't quite hungry enough to finish it. For nearly the entire span of human evolution, a single cooked meal represented hours of saved effort and a genuine edge in survival. Today, most people in developed nations are surrounded by more of that once precious resource than they could ever need, and their ancient brains, still running the same reward circuitry built around scarcity, haven't caught up. That mismatch is part why global rates of obesity and metabolic disease have climbed so sharply over the last several decades. Your body isn't broken. It's running software designed for a world that no longer exists. And the deepest, strangest twist in all of this is genetic evidence that some scientists believe is still being written today. Lactase persistence, the ability many adults have to digest milk without discomfort, only became widespread in human populations within the last 10,000 years, after certain groups began domesticating animals and relying heavily on dairy. It's one of the fastest, most powerful examples of natural selection acting on humans in recorded genetic history. And it happened for the exact same underlying reason cooking reshaped us hundreds of thousands of years earlier. A new, reliable food source appeared, and the humans whose bodies could exploit it more efficiently simply outcompete and out-reproduced the ones who couldn't. In other words, the story that started with a nervous ancestor holding meat over a flame 40,000, or really closer to 1.5 million years ago never actually ended. It's still happening. Every population that shifts its diet, every group that adopts a new staple food, every generation that changes how it eats, is quietly nudging its own genetic code, the same way that first cook, whoever they were, nudged the code of everyone who came after them. You are not the finished product of evolution. You're a snapshot mid-sentence in a story that started with fear around a fire and hunger for something better. The gut you have, the brain you're using to process this right now, the cravings that pull at you late at night. None of it was designed on purpose. It was built quietly and without consent by a habit repeated so many times across so many generations that your species' own biology had no choice but to change around it. There's one more piece of evidence that tends to stop people cold when they hear it for the first time. Researchers studying modern hunter-gatherer groups who still rely partly on wild, unprocessed foods have noted something unsettling about what happens when cooked calories disappear even briefly. Energy reserves drop fast. Focus fades. Group cohesion frays. It doesn't take weeks of deprivation to see the effects. It can take days. That fragility isn't a personal failing. It's the price tag on the trade our ancestors made without ever seeing the invoice. A brain this expensive needs fuel this efficient, delivered this consistently, or the whole system starts to falter. And this is where the story loops back to something deeply personal, something almost every viewer watching this has felt and never connected to any of this. Ever notice how exhausted, foggy, and short-tempered you get when you skip a meal? Ever notice how disproportionate that reaction feels compared to the actual stakes? You're not starving, you're just late for lunch, and yet your body reacts like the emergency is real? That reaction is ancient. It's the same alarm system that once meant the difference between reaching the next cooked meal and slowly losing the energy war against a body that no longer knows how to run efficiently on raw, unprocessed food. Your irritability at 1 p.m. with an empty stomach is a message sent from a body still calibrated to a world of scarcity, still assuming every missed meal might be the start of a real crisis. Scientists have also found something else worth sitting with. The shift toward cooked food didn't just reshape digestion and brain size, it reshaped the human face itself. Jaw muscles attached to the skull along ridges that, in earlier hominins, were massive, built to generate the crushing force needed to grind tough raw plants and fibrous meat for hours. As cooking took over more of that mechanical work, those muscles no longer needed to be so powerful. Jaws narrowed, faces flattened. The heavy brow ridges and thick, forward-jutting jaws of earlier hominins gradually gave way to the smaller, more delicate facial structure modern humans carry today. In a very real sense, the human face you see in the mirror is partly a monument to 1 million years of not having to chew as hard as your ancestors once did. It even changed how humans talk. A softer jaw, a shorter gut, more energy freed up for brain tissue involved in fine motor control, and complex vocalization. Some researchers argue these shifts helped lay the groundwork for the kind of intricate, rapid speech no other primate on Earth can produce. Chimpanzees have the lungs and, to some extent, the vocal apparatus for sound. What they don't have is the neurological surplus, the spare metabolic capacity, to run the extraordinarily complex processing that language demands. That surplus, once again, traces back to calories saved and calories gained around a fire. So when you consider everything this one habit touched, brain size, gut length, tooth structure, jaw shape, facial structure, social bonding, group violence, language, even the genetic variants some populations carry today for digesting starch and dairy, it becomes hard to name a single part of what makes you human that wasn't shaped, at least in part, by that first nervous bite of cooked meat. Not agriculture, not writing, not even tool use on its own. Cooking sits underneath almost all of it, quietly running the background code that made everything else possible. And maybe that's the real reason this story deserves more attention than it usually gets. We love to imagine human greatness as something chosen, a hero ancestor who looked at fire and decided boldly to change the future. But the truth is quieter and stranger. It was habit, repetition, Millions of small, unremarkable moments where hungry, frightened people reached toward warmth and flavor without any idea what they were setting in motion. Evolution didn't reward intention. It rewarded whatever kept getting repeated generation after generation until repetition became biology. That's worth remembering the next time you catch yourself reaching for a habit you can't quite explain. A craving, a comfort, a pull towards something that feels older than logic. You might tell yourself it's just a preference. But somewhere underneath it, there's a good chance you're running code that's been compiling for over 1,000,000 years, written not by choice, but by everything your ancestors couldn't stop doing one small fire at a time. So the next time you sit down to eat something warm, something cooked, something that took almost no effort compared to what would have cost your ancestors, remember what that convenience actually is. It's not just a meal. It's the end result of one of the strangest, most consequential accidents in the entire history of life on Earth. A nervous human, a flickering fire, and a bite that never should have felt safe. And somehow, that one small, repeated choice is the reason you have a brain to wonder about any of this at all.